Chapter 14 Huron's Revenge. The fine weather held for the traverse of Huron and a 2-day layover in Sault Ste. Marie. Their first full day on Lake Superior was perfect as well. Then, after breaking camp on the second morning, the brigade decided to save 20 miles by cutting straight across a huge bay called Michipikoten. As usual, the crew teased Charbonneau about his dire predictions. Beloy wet his finger and tested the breeze. "Can this be the curse of Huron fallen upon us, Charbonneau?" he asked. Everyone laughed. 30 minutes later, no one was joking. Huge white caps rolled out of the west. The bow slid like the nose of a great sea beast down the backside of each wave, and rose high on the oncoming crest. Sometimes a wave washed over the prow, and other times a big breaker dropped the bark hull onto the water with a shuddering crack. Pierre feared the canoe would break apart. His hands burned from the biting cold. At times the wind gusted so hard that the crew had to pull with all their strength to stay dead in the water. Raindrops popped into the hull like flung pebbles. To forget his aching, Pierre thought of home. He tried to recall happy times such as the spring day when he and Camille and Celeste had sailed little hand-carved boats on the creek behind their house, and a wagon trip he and his family had taken to Montreal on Bastille Day when he was 10. But his mind kept drawing back to a single dark image from just a summer ago. That afternoon, Pierre was swimming with his friends down the company landing. He was surfacing near the pier when an older boy pushed him under as a joke. At first, Pierre thought nothing of it. Even when the boy put his feet on Pierre's back and pressed him down to the bottom, he expected him to let go. Then, as Pierre listened to the muffled laughter from above, he was suddenly afraid. The boy wouldn't get off. He tried to lift him, but the dim laughter continued. Pierre's head pounded. Waves of red and black swept through his brain. Just before he was ready to swallow a huge gulp of water, he dug his fingernails into the boy's ankles, and the pressure was released. When he broke the surface and spit out a mouthful of brown river water, his friends pointed and laughed. Pierre played along with the joke. He smiled as he clutched the dock post and caught his breath. But even after his pulse returned to normal, he was still trembling inside. As Pierre dug his paddle into the waves, he wondered how many times he could last in the icy waters of Superior if they swamped. If it was true what they said about the big lakes not giving up their dead, how long would it take for his body to sink 1,200 feet? Pierre was picturing the cold lips of fish picking at his eyeballs when a shout from the front of the canoe shocked him back to the present. It was Beloy. "Hold on!" the bowman yelled. Beloy stood with his thighs braced against the gunwales. A cascade of water hit him full in the chest, but he held his footing. Yelling like a warrior, the bowman reached with his paddle and pulled the canoe straight into the next swell. In the brief calm that followed, Beloy turned to the rear of the canoe. "The kettle, Pierre!" he shouted. It was his duty as the youngest crewman. Pierre bailed while the rest of the crew paddled with all of their strength. The waves were getting higher now that the wind had the full force of 400 miles of open lake behind it. And what was worse, the brigade had to angle across the waves to hold their course for the headland. Charbonneau steered as direct a route as he dared, knowing that the strength of his crew wouldn't allow a more gradual approach. Beloy paid careful attention to each wave, shouting "Ship oars" when he wanted the bow to rise with a dangerous swell, and yelling "Fall to" when he wanted the paddling to resume. Quartering into the waves was becoming more dangerous, and turning around and running into the wind to the eastern shore would be suicide. Turning to Charbonneau, Beloy pointed with his paddle. "How about the island?" he shouted through the wind. There was no answer. Pierre turned. Charbonneau was studying the big island. Shrouded in mist, it was only slightly closer than the headland of Michipikoten Bay. The clear advantage would be a direct upwind course. "What do you say?" Beloy called again. Charbonneau stared at the island and then at the north shore of the bay. Emile and several other crewmen turned now, but no one spoke. There would be no survivors if they swamped. Finally, Charbonneau nodded. "Signal McKay!" All 5 canoes turned upwind and headed straight for Michipicoten Island, and they were no longer in danger of broaching, but they still had to struggle against the waves. Emile offered to take a turn with the kettle, while Pierre paddled again. Numb with cold and fatigue, Pierre's mind floated back to the church in Lachine. The candles were lit, the altar cloth and the flowers were in place, yet the only people in sight were Pierre and Celeste. Wearing a blue lace dress, she was standing in front where the priest should be. Her hair was tied back with white ribbons, and she smiled at Pierre. Just then the door opened, and Father Michael, dressed in his Sunday robe, ran up the aisle, hurrying like a small boy who was late for school. Celeste's face darkened, the priest turned, and Pierre was shocked to see it was not the priest, but the town doctor. He held out a huge pair of silver shears toward Celeste. Pinched between the tip of the bright blades was Pierre's father's severed thumb. Pierre lurched forward, ignoring the command to ship oars. He'd taken a paddle stroke in empty air. "Whoa!" Charbonneau exclaimed, reaching with his paddle to keep Pierre from pitching sideways out of the canoe. "Stay in the saddle, son!" Just then there was a sickening crack amidships as the canoe was caught on double crest and lifted both bow and stern. Had the seam split? Despite the bailing, the water in the canoe was now rising over the top of Pierre's moccasins. An hour of paddling finally brought them into partial calm. The rain stopped, too, as they neared the island, but now 3 men had to bail. With fewer men paddling, the water poured in even faster. Pierre saw that the other canoes had reached the shore, but they were still a quarter of a mile out. "Must we die so close to a lee shore?" he thought. Beloy wrested another kettle from a pack and set one more man bailing. They worked furiously, but the gunwale sank ever closer to the surface of the water. La Petite could see their plight from shore and hastily unloaded his cargo. Recruiting 4 of his men, they soon paddled out to help. Holding the canoes side by side, Charbonneau's crew used the last of the strength to transfer the freight from the foundering canoe. Even before their parcels were unloaded, the teasing began. La Petite looked at the sorry fellows sitting calf-deep in chilly water and chuckled. "You know, gentlemen," he declared, "it works better to paddle over the lake instead of in it." And that's the end of chapter 14.